and then I'll have the light go further until it stops, and then I breathe into that area until it goes all the way through my body. And then I'm like, and then I ask 3 words to come. I'll write down those 3 words, and then that's what I'll end up writing about, but not in that moment. I just write down the words and set aside, and then I'll ask for a sentence or something like that. Do you ever do meditation into creative writing?
Yeah, pretty much every day I meditate for a little bit. My meditation practice changes over time, but I've also been meditating for a long time. And the thing about it is it's a practice, right? Like, so It makes sense to me that, like, you're a shallow breather. It doesn't matter how long we've been doing it, because it's like one of those things you have to keep going back and going, oh yeah, that's right, I'm breathing shallowly again. Practice. I'm the same way. I'll hold my breath, clench my jaw, forget to exhale. But yeah, so especially today, especially in the era, I find that a lot of people we're consuming so much content. I think we talked about this on a previous episode. Time magazine did a study. The average American consumes 185 newspapers of content a day.
Wow.
Not an actual newspaper, but by all the freaking scrolling and reading and looking things up that we do. I don't think that's necessarily bad, but I don't think it's that great either. And I think it's very easy to lose your own voice. That was not a problem that all the authors of the past had, like getting all jumbled up in everyone else's thoughts and ideas. So I do really think even taking, if you're going to use writing and journaling as like a meditative spiritual practice, I do really believe in taking even just a few minutes to focus on your breath. Go on YouTube and find like a simple meditation if you're new to it. It doesn't have to be this crazy fancy thing. It could be whoever is listening, find a meditation that feels good for you. And even if you do that for 5 minutes, it puts you in a headspace to then journal and write from a space of, it's not going to be perfect. It's not like it's going to make your words flow perfectly, but it gets you in a more where you're writing from yourself, not writing from that surface level of life. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I love that. Yes. All right. So in your book, Robot Coconut Trees, what are some of your favorite exercises? Or in just what are your favorite exercises?
Yeah. So one of my favorite exercises, I think this is in Robot Coconut Trees, but honestly, it's been a couple years. I'm not 100% sure. One of my favorite exercises, this is helpful for improving memory, also like improving storytelling and being present in the moment, is if you take your journal and think about an experience in the past day, like a 5-minute or less chunk of time that you had. So this is obviously going to change every day, right? So if you can like hone in on some 5-minute time of your life, even if it's boring and mundane, and write your journal and tell it like a story. Tell it like, I was sitting at the cafe and I had to move my chair over because the woman next to me needed a little more room. Then I ordered a soy latte and I was staring at this weird plate on the wall. Like, it doesn't have to be good. We're not talking like high literature here. It can be a little rambling. But what that helps with is, first of all, capturing the moments of our lives. Life goes too fast. Most of it's a blur. Even the things that we like, even like little tidbits of information about my nephews, people I love, that I think, oh, I'm never going to forget that. Sometimes I forget it. Right. Little detail. Alyssa, I have twin nephews, and one of them had a birthmark growing up, and I knew that their whole life, and this weekend I forgot which one it was, for example. Like, was it Robbie? Was it Jackson? It's little things like that. They get lost to time. And so there is something cool about capturing a moment of your day. And it also helps you tell things like a story where there's like some sort of narrative arc. So that's one of my favorite exercises because it makes me feel like more of a novelist than I really am. It helps me get a writing book.
Yeah, I love that. And, that reminded me of something I used to do was I'd write something small like that, right, to capture a moment. I used to go, I'm so weird. I used to go to Orlando Airport and just sit and wait for all people to get around me and write stories about them.
That's
I would
awesome.
listen to little pieces of it and then I'd make up the rest of it and I'd be right. That's when I was more fictional writing, but I would just go to the airport by myself and sit. Now it's harder to get back to places and stuff like that, but I forget. It was so cool that I was like, I love this. I guess it'd be easier to go to a train station now that we have trains here, but I don't do that now.
What a cool idea. I've never done that. That's great. That's awesome.
I used to, when Steve and I would be walking, he was funny because I guess I could have told him I was a writer at the beginning, but I didn't. But we'd be walking and I'd see somebody, I'd say, hey, and I would open up and just say, that person does this, this, and this, and this, and da, 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 and I tell this whole story about it. And he goes, really? I go, no, I don't know. I've never met them. I was like, I would just make a story no matter what. And at first, I think it actually not bugged him. That's not the right word, but he didn't know it was coming from a writer standpoint because he's not a writer, but he's an artist that had quit his art for a while. So in that way, he'll say he draws perspective things. I don't know. It's just
cool. That's awesome. That's very cool. Another interesting one that I think has been helpful. This is less of a so those are awesome. Like, especially if you're thinking about getting into fiction or writing a memoir or just telling better stories. Yeah. I love that airport one. That's so cool. One that helps me when I'm struggling with something, whether it's a tiny issue or like one of those long running sort of relationship entanglements, one of those long running issues that's always affected me.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to journal on is, what am I not seeing here? That's one of my favorite journal prompts when you're in a bind or when you're like questioning what's going on or when you're pissed at someone. What am I not seeing here? What have I not thought of? Like, what perspective have I not taken? For me, I always recommend that to folks. I think that's a good one. It's not saying, you're wrong, you need to see the whole picture, but I think it helps us get out of our limited frame of mind and say, okay, there's a bigger story than what I'm seeing. What is it? Even if I'm still right, what is the bigger story?
Right. But that's awesome.
In our own vision and then being blindsided, like, oh, I never thought of it another way. Just practicing putting ourselves in other people's shoes, seeing a bigger story. I think that's a skill that is really helpful to have in friendships.
Oh yes.
For sure, in family.
Really helpful. Yeah, because there's always something we're not seeing because we're seeing it from our perspective, and that's what's beautiful about it. When you were saying that, remind me very much of A Course in Miracles, actually, because miracle is a shift in perception. So my friend and I, Mary Beth, her and I used to call each other every day and share a miracle. And I was like, okay. So I was all excited about sharing this miracle. I forgot it was like Course in Miracles miracle. And she'd call and she'd find a miracle. And I go, oh, yeah, anything can be a miracle. It's a shift. So it focused us. It was almost like a verbal writing because it focused us on exactly like seeing a different perspective of whatever it was. So yeah, that's cool. Very cool. I like that.
I have a question for you as in my co-host duties.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about, tell a story or share a little bit about a time when you felt like your writing, I want to talk for a little bit about writing being good. I'm doing air quotes for those of you listening on audio, versus bad. And sort of any stories or thoughts you have on a time when you felt like your writing was bad versus good, or what, if it was a change in perception or anything that comes up.
When I was writing prolifically, back in the 90s, actually, I couldn't stop writing. That's all I could do. And I loved the way I wrote. I loved the poetic musings of the words. I would have the longest run-on sentences, and I did not care. I knew an editor would edit them, and I would put them right back. Not maybe all of them. But I was like, I'm very Tennessee Williams. I love that writing. Then there'd be other times I do a lot of, what's it called? The streamline, automatic writing, not automatic where I don't know what my hand's doing, but automatic as I just start writing. And sometimes I would just be like, oh my God, what am I writing? As I'm still writing. So it's almost like I could have two people within me watching me write and then be that person. And then other times I would be like, I just write the same thing over and over and over, year after year after year. This is nothing new. And I'd like put aside, or I'd put something where I'm like, this really sucks. Why did I call myself a writer? And I'd put it away. Then later I'd read it and go, oh, that's pretty good. But I actually stopped writing for years. When I was doing the magazine, strangely, I was so excited. It's a magazine. I get to express myself. But the magazine that I did was, I was a managing editor. I was a model coordinator. I wrote because I could, I could choose to write the article or choose to have somebody else do it. And it took me the longest to turn in my assignments. And Christopher once asked, why does it take you so long? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I can do hardcore business and creative writing at the same time. I was like, my head was so full that it was so hard for me to write creatively at that point. And I really wanted it to be creative. And I actually, there was a part of me going, there's only so many words I can use about clothing. There's only so many, so I started really thinking I was losing all my skills during my magazine time. So I decided to hire out writers for that. And then when it all beefed up again was when I found spiritual writing again. And I started going, this is my groove. Why do I not share this with people? This is what I believe in. This is what I can't not write on. And so we had decided, I talked him into doing a spiritual column. I'm like, oh, I'm going to be a columnist. That's so exciting. That was the year that magazine, the first one that was supposed to come out in, it just disappeared. I know. That was it. But that's okay. And what I should have done was, when I'm meant to do this, and find a magazine that was still doing that then, and get in there, because magazines still were cool. It was starting to be a little more online, but we still had hardcore magazines. But the further I got away from my original oomph of, oh my God, I can't stop writing, the more I thought I was a dud.
Okay.
But then years later, revisiting it, my writing today isn't like the writing that I loved from the past, but it makes more sense. And I realize not everybody writes or likes to read those long sentences, and not everybody likes words the way I do. So I can get to more people if I wrote more concisely, but still poetically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's kind of like this ebb and flow into that. So yeah. I don't know. Did you ever have a time you hated your writing?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I think one of the things, if you're going to write a lot, like I have a blog, I have a book, I have, and I write every day. I mean, it's sort of a numbers game in a way, I think. Like, if you write all the time, like I'm really big on writing when I don't feel like it. I feel like some people are like that with working out, right? Like they work out when they don't feel like it. They're really into fitness. I'm not. But like with writing, I really am big on not waiting to feel good about like just writing. And so the byproduct of that is sometimes it isn't like good, sometimes it's just like, a lot of times actually it's just me like kind of rambling around on the page, and that's okay, because I'm in the process of it, and I feel like the more you show up, the better it gets. I've always been interested in that idea, because I feel like there's this elitist idea of like what is good and what is bad, and in our minds it is easy to be like, oh well, I'm not like a real writer, for example, but that's really like, I guess, yeah, that's not as much good or bad, but like real versus not real is like such a made up designation. And like unless you're sitting around never writing, in which case, you're not really writing. You're not really a writer, I would say. But like, if you're writing and showing up, so I'm thinking about like, so there's a lot of people who don't. I really like what you said. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling. I'm trying to find the exact precise words here.
No, you're
I
good.
really like how you described that when you went back to your spiritual way of writing, you were cool. And maybe it's